We're going to continue now with the presentation by Claudio Zolla, the CEO, I think, of Rampone and Cazzani saxophones in Cremona, Italy. We've become dear friends over a number of years. It all started with me playing one of his saxophones here in the United States through a company called Sax Forte, Matthew Aaron in South Carolina. Yeah, and I flew down there just out of curiosity and spent the day playing Rampone tenors and was so impressed with the unique quality of the horn. And I always say this when I speak of his instruments. If you like a Selmer Mark VI, it's the industry standard for many, many years. It is what the sound of the jazz saxophone centered on for many, many generations. So, for many, many decades, I should say. So, for a Rampone, it's not that. In fact, it's simply a Rampone. It's a different style of sound, it's different architecture in the bore, and I'll let Claudio get into the details, but the point is, from a player's perspective, I was smitten with the unique voice that this saxophone has. The same way that a King Super 20 has its own voice, a Kahn has its own voice, a Selmer has its own voice. And here Rampone, in a modern day world, brings to the table this high quality, professional, custom, handmade instrument that indeed has its own voice. There's wonderful stories I've heard of the moment of conception of this saxophone and the association and the knowledge of what Adolphe Sax was doing. We're talking about something that began at that point with the saxophone and many, many years before with Rampone and Cazzani, the factory. I've been there many times myself. It's a small factory, literally up in the mountains of northern Italy, and it's breathtaking. Many saxophones make a pilgrimage to come see Claudio at the factory, because in addition to it being a saxophone factory, literally, guys sitting there making saxophones, there's a storefront. And when you walk in, one of the most stunning things for any saxophonist is to walk in the store area of the factory, which is actually inside the factory itself. You can smell the fumes of things here and there. And this line of saxophones, many sopranos, sopraninos, altos, tenors, baries, several custom horns for customers, and many different variations of plating and things to choose from. And I must, on that note, I have to say that I never knew that plating and finishes really had as much impact. I never believed it did until I had a chance to really spend time at the Rampone factory trying the different platings. An incredible difference. It has something to do with the process, I'm sure, but it truly does make a total difference. So the player has many options based around the Rampone sound. So in addition to his presentation, I've asked him to speak a little bit about the factory and its location, to speak a little bit about the storefront at his factory and what he supplies to the European community there. I've been privileged enough to meet many of his friends who make some interesting mouthpieces in Italy. Some of the vintage materials that come through his store that he is known as a reseller of vintage and important mouthpieces and things as well. So I've asked him to kind of cover all that territory, as well as the concept of hand-making saxophones, which is a very special and somewhat lost art until the rejuvenation of Claudio under his father's realm, Roberto Zolla, who is another fantastic mind and engineer. So that's what this presentation is about, and we'll go until about 5:15, 5:30, and we'll be happy to take questions along the way via internet or live. So, Claudio Zolla.
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you, Wayne State University, once more for me here explaining about in fact, what I do every day. So, as Francois was saying, it's the same with me. I could speak for maybe months about what I do every day. So please, if you have special, specific questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And excuse my English, by the way. I hope I'll be, good enough to be clear with you. So we can speak about bore, we can speak about the way of making the horn, we can speak about finishings, we can speak about variables influencing the sound. We can speak about many different things. I like to maybe quickly tell you that confirming what Chris was telling to you, that we are based
in fact, on the Alps, northwest of Italy, between Milan and Switzerland. In fact, this is our base since ever. Two guys, one of my ancestors and the nephew, moved to Milan looking for luck, for something different to do, and they, in fact, met a guy making flutes in Milan. And this guy was making very simple flutes, recorders, and not even without keys. I mean, very, very simple things. I'm speaking of almost 200 years ago. And when this guy, Mr. Luoni, retired, decided to sell the know-how in a way and some of the machineries to the two guys coming from Quarna for, because he didn't have sons, and so he decided like that, probably just by chance. So the two guys bought this factory, and from there, 1818, they started to work on musical instruments. As you know, saxophone was invented later, and they decided to move back to the little village. By the way, our village is at 850 meters above the sea level, and we are altogether 432 people. So a huge. And which is making maybe our reality even more unique, because because you have kind of climbing up on the mountains to reach our factory, and it happens often that they call us in the middle of the mountain. Oh, I'm wrong. What should I do now? No, keep up coming. So, going back to the horns, the two guys came back to Quarna with the idea to use the local woods, because as I told you, they were masters in turning the wood, and so they thought to use pear wood, laburnum, boxwood, the hardwoods available in place, in Quarna. And obviously later they started to work on metals. They didn't have any electricity power, so they used the power of the water mill, so transforming water in power, and working with the first very simple lathes or drills or engine desks and things like that. And they also thought immediately to use the help of their families. This is something pretty usual in Italy, just to kind of start from little businesses and then try to move up and increase a little bit, and but always being very close to the product. Later on, Agostino, who was the main mind of the factory in the last 2 centuries ago, was on top of, was the manager, was the owner, in fact, of Rampone, and he developed flute making, regular flute making, and flugelhorns, hunting horns, very in the past, obviously. And later, in fact, about 25 years after the invention of the saxophone by Adolphe Sax in Belgium, Dinant, Agostino decided to work on his first prototype of saxophone. So our first prototype of saxophone is dated back 1875. This is a very, very important date for us. One of these exemplars is still collected by the Museum of Musical Instruments in Quarna, our little village. So you are all invited and very welcome if you are around in Italy to come and visit factory and museum. The museum is also, I spent 2 words about the museum. It's a very unique museum because it's not only a collection of vintage horns, so I'm speaking of clarinets, flutes, saxophones, but even sarrusophones and very special things. But it's unique because you can see, the process, we have reproduced inside the museum the process of making a saxophone by hand, and then making a clarinet by hand, and then making a flute by hand, and making even a flugelhorn or a trumpet by hand. This is pretty much detailed, so I think it's very interesting to visit. Museum, it's an association from the place, no profit, and that was put together maybe 50 years ago by citizens from the village who decided to keep precious things all together, and then it started like a little museum, and then now we have a pretty nice building open to visitors mostly during the summer, because if you come in winter, we are a very little village and you have to call for booking a visit or something like that. So, trying to step up a little bit and go quicker to the end, I can tell that Agostino started work on his first saxophone in 1875. But later he was still very much concentrated in making flutes, because himself he was a flute player and also a great technician. Also the son of Agostino, Teodoro Rampone, one of my ancestors again, played the flute in the Milan Scala Theater. And for a curiosity, you can even find this written down in books in Italy. Agostino was helping Mr. Böhm to complete the Böhm system on the flute, just to give you an idea of who Agostino was. So he was a technician, a musician, and also an inventor, because he introduced many good things and many new things. Obviously, at the in early 900s, the saxophone was not very famous yet, so the factory was concentrated in making mostly flugelhorns and flutes and clarinets, etc. So with the event of World War I and World War II, economically the situation was not very good inside Rampone and Cazzani, and also Agostino died before in 1894 or 1896. I mean, they had to spread out the responsibility of the factory, because you have to consider in those years Rampone was exporting a lot of the production already in the 5 continents, to New Zealand, to everywhere, and some investors came into the factory to bring some liquidity, you know. And later on, after World War II, 5 different people were, you know, owning the factory, so it was a little bit complicated to understand each other's, because the people were inside the factory only like investors, so they wanted to see only money in the pocket, and not maybe they were not very open to invest or experiment or in doing what the Rampones were doing before from the beginning, I mean. So exactly 1957, an entrepreneur, a guy from Varese, always in the north of Italy, bought the factory close to bankruptcy. So just because he had some contacts with some of the managers, and his son, Mr. Saltamerenda, very funny name, by the way, for his meaning in Italian, decided to switch and to start making musical instruments with another philosophy, because he was not a Rampone, he was not from Quarna, you know, he was not a technician, so he was mostly an entrepreneur. So he wanted to make, again, something more industrialized a little bit the process, and he was very interested to sell the quantity of horns. So for many years, I'm saying that because many times people ask me, who is Rampone? We never heard about it, and or maybe they remember very old pieces, but we have a kind of break in the middle. So I want to tell you that this guy was exporting a lot of the production, and for many years they were making, with more than 100 workers, about 1,400 musical instruments per month. So mostly flutes, but clarinets, flugelhorns, and saxophones. And at the end, in fact, the guy was very concentrated on quantity, not very much in relationship with the musicians. I remember my father and also my grandfather telling me, Jerry Mulligan visited our factory 1974. We also have pictures, and they also told me that he left the factory with a baritone sax, and probably played it for a while, because our baritone sax is pretty close, like philosophy, to the con saxophone. But that was mostly a visit, like I'm the great player visiting a factory, but not coming there to cooperate or to be in close contact with the manufacturer. So I will say 1980, 1985. Again, another crisis came out on the market because the first Taiwanese Korean products or a Japanese product came into the market with pretty low prices, and most of the customers from the last owner moved from buying from him to buy from China or from Taiwan or from Korea, because one of the mistakes to me of the old owner is that he was stamping many horns without the Rampone name, but it was stamping for everybody, for Rossi or whatever, Johnson, or so we made stencils for Busin Oaks, maybe somebody heard about this name, or for even Calvert, the student line. I saw myself contracts for Calvert for selling them the student line, and still today we have two big boxes, wooden boxes, plenty of plates with different brand names for which the guy was working for, and that's it. So the guy, when he saw that the business was really going down, he decided pretty quickly to prepare to close the factory. But at the end of 1989, they had a meeting, this guy, my father, and Alessi factory. Alessi factory is a factory based very close to our factory, and they are leader in design, nothing to do with musical instruments, but maybe some of you heard about them. And they make furniture for the house, a very high-level design from Italy. They even have a joint venture today with Siemens and Fiat for the cars and other stuff like that. They were considering to buy the factory themselves, but finally they decided it was something a little bit too far from their perspective. So they finally told during one of these meetings that if somebody was going to buy the Rampone factory, they were going to support economically the project Alessophone, which is an alto sax. I don't have it with me here, but an alto sax with the where we applied the Alessi design. In fact, my father mostly worked close with an architect from Italy. Mendini was pretty famous and designed many things in Italy, Japan, and worldwide. My father, sorry, I have to step back a little bit, I lost myself. And my father was involved for many reasons in this meeting, because he was living in the little village, and he finally decided to, I always like to say, buy back the factory, because we are descendants from the Rampone family. My grandmother is a Rampone. So was a Rampone, and so end of 1989 my father buys back the factory, and Alessi started with this project of the Alessophone and helped us a lot to start, because they were financing research and experimenting for this new alto saxophone. This new alto saxophone has a very special bell shape with kind of a flat flare, and the neck is a very open angle. It's black. It's black nickel plated with graphite inside and covered with lacquer, and some very special things like a piece of coral here with two initials OA, which means Officine Alessi in gold. And this is mostly a piece for collectors. We made maybe 20 to 25 maybe pieces, and we sold them around the world, but its cost is today retail 12,000 euro. So that's why it's more for collectors. And also after Alessophone we did much more research, and we have developed the R1 line, and later on in 2003 the R1 Jazz line. You see here we have some example of R1 Jazz line. If you after the conversation would like to test some of them, I'll be very happy. And that's it. In fact, when my father bought the factory, we decided quickly, I was pretty young in those years, he decided quickly to move making mostly saxophones. We still manufacture other horns, but very few of them, and we introduced new horns like today. For instance, our saxophone family starts from the sopranino A flat going to the baritone, and we make both low A and low B flat baritones. We have already in progress works for introducing the bass saxophone, maybe in 2 years from now, I don't know. And but more in detail, we have sopranino, straight sopranino, E flat. Then we have 3 different sopranos. Straight one, you see here. The half curved one, also called saxello because of king and this and that. But some people we have heard online, they don't maybe like that people call our half curved soprano saxello because that was the king model. But I must tell, and there is a prototype testifying this, that in the museum in Quarna, we have an old saxello, kind of saxello made by Rampone and Cazzani, dated back 1920, something like that. So it's not very sure if King made the saxello before, or maybe in the same years, or maybe later, because from my information, King deposited the patent of the name saxello in 1926. Anyway, so we have the half curved soprano and the fully curved soprano, an exemplar here. Then we have alto. We introduced, even with the help of our friend Chris Collins, the altello. He helped us to develop the horn, which is a straight alto, but I like to call it altello. It's down there. Chris kindly borrowed me his one to show it to you. And then we have a tenor, and then the 2 baritones.